Hey everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of the Behold podcast on the Genre Equality channel. I'm Hitzir,
Nicer.
and it's that time of the year where we decide the best football team on the planet, and also the best TV shows in the world right now. Have you been watching the World Cup, by the way?
I haven't actually. I've been checking the results and all of that. I just have a lot of mixed feelings about the World Cup and where it's being staged and the whole FIFA thing. So,
Of course, of
yeah.
course. Like, yeah, I mean, it was the same with the previous two venue locations as well.
Mhm.
And then all that controversy and all the, human rights abuses tend to get forgotten the first kickoff, the first whistle
Yeah,
blows.
yeah, yeah. I mean, like at the
Um,
end of the day, like the sport itself, right, or rather, like sports in general, is kind of like universal language.
yeah,
Super happy to find out that Korea and Japan made it to the knockout stages. I also heard that Japan just got knocked out. Unfortunately, dating this episode.
Korea as well. They got demolished by Brazil
Brazil?
4-1.
Yeah, yeah. That is unsurprising in any way. But
Yeah, I was at a friend's house watching the Korea Brazil match, and by halftime, I was like, "Yep, this is it. I think I'm gonna go home and sleep."
yeah, yeah. I mean, like it would have been tough for any country. But like kudos to Korea and Japan for making it that far.
Hmm.
With everything, I think that was kind of like the highlight. Oh, they made it in, awesome, right? Like shout out to them.
Shout out to Morocco as well, the only other Asian team
Yeah.
in the final 16. So hey, I hope Morocco stays, but they're facing Spain, so
Ugh,
boy, what an uphill battle.
yeah, that's gonna be bad.
Yeah, but I mean, speaking of shouting out Japan and Korea, lots of Japanese, well, at least one Japanese and Korean show will be in our top 10
Yes, exactly.
best shows of 2022. But for the first part of the episode, we won't be delving into our top 10 just yet. If you recall, back in June, we talked about the four best new
Mhm.
shows of 2022 for the first half.
Yeah.
In keeping with that, so we're going to be talking about the four best new shows of 2022 on the second half, on the
Mhm.
back half.
Yeah.
So the requirements is June to December onwards. Okay.
Mhm.
So if we don't mention things like Omar Vep or whatever, or we own the city, keep in mind we already talked about it on a previous Behold
That
episode.
is true.
So go back to our June, go back to our archives, check out our June episodes. That's where we talked about the best new shows from the first half of 2022. We're
Mhm.
delving into the second half right now.
Yeah.
Let's begin with the Bear. Boy, the Bear follows a talented, successful fine dining chef named Carmen, played by shameless star Jeremy Allen White,
Yeah.
who returns to his hometown Chicago neighborhood to take over a dingy beef sandwich shop after his brother, who had been running it, passes away due to suicide. Um, yeah, this is without a doubt one of the most anxiety-inducing TV series
Oh
I have
god.
ever seen.
Yeah.
It nails the Safdie brothers tone that it was definitely going for.
Yeah.
The mayhem and the din of flaring short tempers. What happens behind the scenes of restaurants is nothing short of a continuous miracle that these chefs get it done. And there's so much pandemonium going on, and this show just puts you right into it. It may not be a Michelin star restaurant. It may just be a grungy sandwich shop. But these chefs and sous chefs and everyone around them take their product seriously, and that's where the conflict comes in.
Yeah.
Specifically from Carmen, who wants to institute uh, a new order to the disorder from his brother's regime, much to the chagrin of his previous staff. The Bear right now available on Disney Plus if you live in Singapore. But if you live in America, obviously it's on Hulu/FX. Yeah, I mean the Bear has been probably one of the few shows that really doesn't need our shout out because
Yeah.
when I picked this very 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 early on, so this is definitely going to be like one of the best new shows of the year. Certainly in the top 4 in the second half. I thought
Yes, for
back
sure.
all the way back in June.
Mhm.
I didn't figure that it would become this sort of like overnight cult summer hit
Yeah.
This sleeper hit that it became, a bit like how Ted Lasso suddenly became this pop culture phenomenon like a couple of years ago. The Bear, obviously, the entire Ted Lasso, very very different,
Yeah.
but has captured the imaginations of the public in the midst of this wave of like IP, revivals, reboots, remakes, just more IP driven content. But it was this tiny little 8 episode show
Mhm.
that seemed to take summer by storm. Were you surprised by that? And what do you think about the Bear once you eventually got onto the bandwagon?
Oh yeah. I mean, I caught the Bear not as early as you when it came out, but just slightly after you were telling me about like the entire premise and in particular like how much of like the Safdie brothers vibe that it came out there.
Mm-hmm.
So now that it's available on Disney Plus, I went to kind of like rewatch the first episode specifically because like I love the first episode, right? Like there's so much good stuff. It is the most anxiety-inducing first episode I have in recent memory, but it is to me it's like a near perfect first episode because it sets the tone for the entire series, right? Like everything that you will need to know, almost everything that you're gonna need to know immediately is given to you within the system, which is the title of the first episode. Whether or not it's the stresses, whether or not you're establishing that the fact that they are struggling or they've got money problems. It has very kind of like clear cut relationships and dynamics that are going on between the characters, despite the fact that you don't know them that well yet. Like it's very clear, especially in the kitchen itself, right? What the dynamic kind of is, and that sets the expectation for what you are going to see, and then later on in the season, both meets, exceeds, and subverts those expectations in like very masterful storytelling and character work.
Yeah.
Really, really enjoyed the Bear overall. I've been shouting out the Bear a fair bit, especially to like friends who are in like the restaurant industry, who have come back
Mm.
to say that it feels a little too close to home, but overall they did
Yeah.
enjoy it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think like it's unsurprising that it got the kind of the kind of like hype and the success that it did after debuting in June, right? So making this one of the older ones on the list as far as
Yeah.
our 6 month timeline goes.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, besides Kami, who is such a magnetic character from the get
Yeah,
go, filling in the margins of the show is also Kami's brother. His brother is named Mikey, the one who passed away.
yeah.
So his brother's best friend is the manager of the restaurant. He's named Richie. You may also recognize him from Andor. He was one of the
Mm-hmm.
rebels in the Aldani heist.
Yeah.
Ibon Mos Bakrak. He detests Kami's pretentious attitude. Then we got Sydney, who is an accomplished chef in her own right, who wants to learn from Kami, and a slew of like grunt line workers who aren't interested in wearing matching aprons or following orders from a relative newcomer
Yeah.
in their eyes.
Yeah.
If the premise sounds like it could be a bit of a sitcom, you're not wrong because this is kind of a dramedy too.
Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of the humor comes from the chaos and the conflict as well as the tension. It's not just people shouting at each other. Sometimes it's funny.
Yeah.
But the tone and intensity with which it's told, honing in on Carmi's perspective and utilizing overlapping dialogue, something that a lot of scriptwriters don't tend to do,
Yes.
induces this claustrophobic feeling that makes it feel far more serious than it would from any other screenwriter. And it's kind of now a given. Even the layman knows that culinary based shows aren't going to be sunshines and roses
Oh yeah.
because we've seen Gordon Ramsay's Hell's Kitchen, we've seen Kitchen Confidential, we've seen the darker side of the industry,
Yeah.
and The Bear certainly shares some tonality with those shows, but also subtly pokes fun at the idea that every kitchen has to be an aggressive atmosphere. That's something that Sydney talks about. Like, we don't have to be this way. The
Yeah.
toxicity doesn't need to be there.
Yeah.
Carmen's sensibilities, like introducing a hierarchy into the kitchen,
Yeah.
feels stifling for a crew who treats the job as a paycheck and not, their life's work. It's not a work of art. They enjoy each other's companies and they just like to cook. And the frenetic energy is a byproduct of Kami kind of taking this role a little too seriously. A part of it is his grief, a part of it is resentment towards his brother,
Yeah.
and trying to transform the sandwich shop into something much bigger than it was ever destined to be. but it was the clash of the two worlds that is fascinating to watch in real time.
Yeah.
As the show unfolded, I'm not talking about the real time episode that the show had, which is spectacular, by the way.
Yeah.
A single take, half an hour episode that was amazing.
Mm.
But that particular episode really signifies or hones in. It's a microcosm of what the show is. Like, it ups the ante and the intensity of the kitchen,
Yeah.
and it guides the audience through the chaos in real time, as I mentioned.
Yeah.
But like I said, like, the charm of the show isn't the conflict. The charm of the show is the relationships.
Yes.
Like, Richie and Carmi are both grappling with grief and the loss of Mikey, and their personalities are completely at odds with one another. Richie despises Kami's holier than thou attitude and the fact that Mikey didn't trust him with the shop. And Kami clearly thinks of Richie as uncouth. They couldn't be more opposite in demeanor, but it's their love for Mikey that holds them together, and manifests in their own kind of slightly repressed, very straight men repressed ways. It's as much a show about grief as it is about masculinity and about running a sandwich shop. Everyone's committed to their roles. I really love Sydney. I really loved Richie. Weirdly enough, also he's such a well-developed character. Despite him being bombastic and aggressive, he usually sucks the air out of the room, right?
Yeah.
But the characterization, I think, works well against Kami and the rest of the people as well.
Yeah.
What do you think about the characterizations, the relationships, and how
man,
the
I
show
loved it.
evolved throughout the 8 episodes? Yeah.
Yeah, I really love these characters. I was invested very early, right? Like midway through the first episode. Okay, there's like some dynamite going on here. Let's see where this goes, right? And
Yeah.
part of me watching how the characters kind of interacted, I said, okay, there's plenty of stuff here that needs to be unpacked first of all, but it also watching a train wreck happen in real time, and it's hard to kind of look away from that because these are interesting characters, right? And I think that the pacing of the series overall has a fascinating way of like keeping you hooked with balancing both the conflict and the anxiety of that with these very, very singular character moments, right? With deep kind of like personal stakes and trauma, grief, and just overall drama. I want in particular to kind of shout out John Bernthal playing Mikey. I think that for large portions we keep hearing about Mikey, right? And like until the point like John Bernthal shows up to play Mikey, like you have to kind of fill in the blanks, right? Like he is a presence there that is at once in the minds of everybody there at the beef, but at the same time like he's altogether absent until that portion. And when he shows up, it's perfect. Like it makes total sense. Like everything that you've seen before that, and he's not that he doesn't have that much to begin with. Also, Joel McHale for the terrifying like couple of minutes that he's on screen, just as the abusive Kami's old executive chef. Wow, like that and all the kind of like flashbacks to that period of his life, Kami's period life was terrifying. Really, really love what's her name? Tina. I really, really love Tina. Like she has like kind of like the best kind of like one-liners and responses among the characters as well. I think my favorite character is Sydney, who seems like the most well-adjusted, most sensible person amidst all these like big characters and drama that's kind of going on. So like it's such a great mix, and like you come to at the end of 8 episodes with even before the resolution, right, of the show. Not to spoil anything for anyone out there who hasn't watched it yet, but you are. It's such a great mix of characters, and they are completely understandable. Everybody has a moment to kind of like shine and to kind of despite only being 8 episodes, you have a opportunity to grasp like what's essential about their character and what they're about, right? And that's hard to do, with such a short overall runtime. So like kudos to the writers. This was a ride, and as much as we say that it is anxiety inducing, right? Like the payoff is more than worth giving this a try, for sure.
Definitely, yeah. Please, if you're one of the few people who have not seen The Bear just yet, It's available on Disney Plus. If you live in America, it's available on Hulu.
Mhm.
If you have a subscription to cable, you can watch it on FX. Plenty of options for you. Go watch The Bear. It's 8 half-hour episodes. Essentially, it's 4 hours long.
Yeah.
It's shorter than the Snyder Cut. Go watch it. You can you can get through it in one sitting if you have
Ooh,
tenacity
yeah.
to endure the anxiety for that long. But yeah,
Yeah.
there you go. The Bear. Still one of the best new shows of 2022, even 6 months later.
Yeah.
Next up, I'll be going to Amazon Freevee. If you've not heard of Amazon Freevee, it's the free version of Amazon Prime. And there is a new show on there called High
Mhm.
School that I want to talk about. It's my second pick for the best new shows of 2022 in the second half. As titles go, it doesn't get more generic than High School, which could suggest anything from a parody to a high-minded documentary to any sorts of high school dramas and or musicals.
Yeah.
But what it probably doesn't suggest is what it actually is. It is a tender portrait of two teenage girls that draws its strength from its knack for unvarnished details and its uncommon sense of empathy.
Yeah.
It also just so happens to be a music biopic of sorts, given that it's adapted from Canadian indie pop duo Tegan and Sarah's memoir of the same title. But to be honest, you don't have to be able to name a single tune of theirs to appreciate High School on its own merits. You don't have to be a Tegan and Sarah fan. You just have to be familiar with that uniquely adolescent pain of realizing that growing up can sometimes mean growing apart from those you loved, even your twin.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah.
Hopefully, you can find your way back again, or at least open to letting high school's lovingly detailed experience kind of engross you in it. If you've ever seen something like My So-Called Life, this is the best, probably spiritual sequel to My So-Called Life that I've ever seen.
Mm.
It is set in the mid 90s,
Mhm.
and as indicated by pitch perfect period details, like the wallet chains swinging from characters' hips, and things like that. High school finds identical twins Sarah and Tegan navigating uncharted territory in more ways than one. Practically speaking, they're starting grade 10 uh, in a new school in suburban Calgary, away from all the kids that they've grown up with. More challenging though is the distance that sprung up between them over the summer. Sarah apparently has started ditching Tegan in favor of more time with her best friend Phoebe,
Mhm.
and the more Sarah pulls away, the more tightly Tegan seems to cling, prompting Sarah to pull away more firmly still. The showrunner, Claire Duval, who also directed most of the episodes, and the creator Laura Cottrell, have an eye for tiny details that define these girls' interior arcs and the intersections between them in a way that you rarely see on television.
Mhm.
The the camera seems to recognize when Tegan and or Sarah have crushes before they themselves do, and it certainly notices when Sarah stubbornly refuses to look at Tegan because she's mad, or when Tegan, breaks unwritten hierarchies that guides the school's social scene. There is so much about it that is unspoken, and uh, acting and directorial wise, I would say it's very similar to Never Really, Sometimes, Always.
Oh.
Although obviously the topic is very, very different. I'm just
Yeah.
saying, like, in terms of style, it's very similar to that.
Mhm.
In terms of tone, it's more similar to My So-Called Life.
Mhm.
Um, the actresses who play them are really, really good. They come in with very, very precise performances of their own, to the point where you can tell which one is which
Mm.
without any differentiation in clothing or music tastes or hairstyles, because these two sisters are actually very, very similar. This two actresses, the Gilliland sisters, were actually discovered by Tegan and Sarah on TikTok.
Oh.
uh, Although you wouldn't know it from their very, very naturalistic performances
Mhm.
or their effortless charisma. Neither Tegan nor Sarah is much given to over explaining themselves, but the actresses can speak volumes with just body language and micro expressions, and that's the show's real masterstroke. Another really, really good thing about the show is its structure. Every half-hour installment is split in two, with each half following a different character through the same events. So the first episode is actually very, very predictable. First half follows Tegan,
Mhm.
and the second half follows Sarah. But sometimes the first half follows Tegan and Sarah, and the second half follows their girlfriend and or boyfriend.
Mhm.
Or the second half follows their parents, or one of their parents. And there's even an episode that doesn't follow Tegan and Sarah at all. It just follows the mother and father. So yeah, it's really, really great, and it's more than just a gimmick. It's that bifurcation is the key to high school's rare emotional sensitivity, and the shift of perspective is what allows it to become very fully fleshed out. The stories contained in these halves are often ones kind of shot through with loneliness and anxiety, as characters struggle to understand what's changed in their relationships or withdraw into themselves rather than open up to their loved ones. We've all been in positions where you sense something is wrong with a friend or a girlfriend or a boyfriend or mother or father or a brother or a sister, right? But you never quite know what's wrong, and your reactions to them not telling you makes you also anxious and also aggressive. But the second half of the episode that flips to the other person's perspective really allows us to see what these characters can't or won't understand when they are unable to express it. Yeah,
Yeah.
this is all really, really great. And it crucially also forces us to regard Sarah and Tegan as separate entities rather than as a singular set of twins, something that I'm very, very used to doing being a fan of their music.
Mhm.
At exactly the same time, they're starting to explore who they might be as individuals, who they are apart. Like Tegan is Tegan and Sarah is Sarah. They're both discovering different things. They both have different likes and dislikes. And they both have a different sets of friends. Eventually, of course, we do know that their path will converge around music. Clearly, spoiler alert. Um, though high school kind of sidesteps the usual overwrought cliches about prodigies or the destiny for musical stardom and things like that. On the
Mhm.
contrary, when we follow Sarah to a piano lesson, the teacher kind of winces at her atrocious, very unpracticed playing. And
Mhm.
by the end of episode 3, the queens haven't so much as picked up a guitar. Like the first half of the show is not music at all, it's just about their lives.
Yeah.
And the series takes a subtle approach of weaving their influences into the plot. The things that they listen to, the CDs that they are fond of, Hole and watching Bjork get interviewed on TV,
Mm.
or skipping school to go to a Green Day concert. In those moments, they could be anyone. They could become anyone. They could be you. They could be me. It's a very relatable sort of show. And reality has already sort of laid out the path for them, but Tegan and Sarah don't know that at this point in time. And high
Mhm.
school isn't eager to rush them there. It isn't even eager to get them to a guitar. Instead, it offers them the understanding and space they need to become the fullest versions of themselves, and in doing so, tells a story that former teenagers anywhere, of teenagers right now, whether they are rock stars or whether they're not, might
Yeah.
be able to connect with. It's the universal appeal of it that is beautiful. And come to think of it, maybe its very generic universal title makes perfect sense after all, because it could be high school for any one of us.
Yeah.
This is not a sex education. This is not a euphoria. This is not a heightened high school environment. This is as real as it gets. And I know it because I've done all the things that Tegan and Sarah have done at that point in time.
Mhm.
I listened to the same bands. We are all of the same age. I did the same things. I got angry at the same things. I got anxious at the same things. Yeah, it's relatable in the way that Ladybird is relatable. So yeah, very, very highly recommended. Go watch it on Amazon Freevee. Yeah, you should check it out also, Isa.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I mean, like, when you first told me about it, I was like, yeah, I really want to check it. And it's just unfortunate I haven't got to it yet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Number 3 though. Let's move on from fiction to something slightly stranger than fiction. Uh, this
Only
is
slightly.
non-fiction. Yeah, we are here to talk about Nathan Fielder's new show, The Rehearsal. Over the past decade, cringe comedian Nathan Fielder has satirized the reality television formula to hilarious heights of absurdism. Um, from pitching outlandish business ideas to struggling companies, on his very, very acclaimed Comedy Central series Nathan For You, to
Mhm.
his own production work on the observational docu-series How to with John Wilson, which we've also reviewed. Fielder has this uncanny knack for using a facade of deadpan obliviousness
Mhm.
and awkward insecurity to expose the sorts of behavioral quirks and unsightly warts of self that people try to hide. And in many ways, Fielder's outrageous stunts and surreal comedy does a better job of helping us understand the modern human condition than the contrived setups of actual reality TV.
Mhm.
Likewise, his latest show, The Rehearsal, is yet another masterpiece of meticulous planning, spiraling into spontaneous chaos that seeks to uncover the root of people's and Nathan's own anxieties through the guise of helping others. The Rehearsal, like all of Fielder's work, is not quite what it seems at first.
Yep.
It is described as a series about the lengths one man will go to reduce the uncertainties of everyday life. This brilliant six-part HBO docu-comedy follows Fielder as he attempts to help random strangers via strategic partnerships. So rather than functioning as a weirdo business consultant, he is now more akin to a life coach, striving to prepare his subjects for uncomfortable confrontations. You know, things like professional confrontations, marital confrontations, parental confrontations, or futures. And he does this by staging elaborate rehearsals. The supposed goal of the show is to help real people prepare for difficult conversations or big life changes by putting them through a practice sessions with actors posing as their loved ones, posing as their friends, posing as bystanders. In the pilot episode, for example, called Orange Juice No Pulp, a geeky New Yorker wishes to confess to a prickly member of his bar trivia team that he
Mhm.
doesn't have an advanced degree. Seems a simple enough confession, but in Fielder's hands, this scenario necessitates, among other things, the literal construction of a bar identical to the one that he frequents in Brooklyn, housed in a warehouse, populated by background actors who've been directed by Nathan to agonize over their own motivations, despite the fact that they're just background actors. This is even before his client is forced to go through variations of the evening multiple times, hundreds of times, in order to be prepared for every possible scenario. In the show's most daring thing, Angela, a 44-year-old living in Oregon, participates in the show's most elaborate and ludicrous rehearsal. To help her decide whether or not to have children, Fielder concocts a plan that will allow Angela to simulate raising a son from his birth to his 18th birthday over the course of just 2 months by using child actors. Each week, this kid, dubbed Adam, ages 3 years. Adding to the chaos is Oregon's labor laws, which state that people under 18 only be allowed to work for 4 hours,
Yeah.
which means that Fielder and his team have to swap out Adams throughout the day. As they try to do it without disrupting the flow of a so-called normal day, it leads to hilarious moments like a staffer rushing up to substitute one Adam in a car seat with another, while Angela is busy putting groceries in the car. The plight of Angela and her motherhood rehearsal takes up the bulk of the first season, even as Fielder spins off to deal with other clients and other endeavors, like, get this, hosting a class for potential rehearsal actors, which becomes its own rehearsal. And what arises from these scenarios is some of the most mind-bending madness you've ever seen on TV. Think a non-fiction version of Synecdoche, New York, in which
Yeah.
Fielder and his crew plunge down this rabbit hole of mimicry until the lines between the real and the unreal hopelessly blur. Fielder, I think, wants to fundamentally wants to understand others and through them himself. That's the impulse that drives the rehearsal, whose nominal aim is to empower individuals by so expertly predicting upcoming situations and dynamics that they can confidently ace tomorrow's big moments. It's a stab
Mhm.
at using rigorous training to eliminate the elements of chance in day to day experiences, and it turns out to be even wilder and more amusing than it sounds. You've only recently caught the rehearsal, so in preparation for this podcast, what do you think of it?
Oh man. Uh I don't know if I could have done as good a job kind of like explaining like the absurdity of the rehearsal or the
Mm-hmm.
absurdity that it kind of becomes, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
much like anything Fielder has kind of done, this is first of all, I don't think it's for everyone, but
Mm.
just kind of give it a shot, right? It will definitely surprise you with that. Like the premise itself is funny and strange and weird, and it goes to the absurdest of places, but there's so many unexpected, tender, sweet human moments that feel incredibly real and um they're completely real and unscripted, right? And that like hits home
Yes. Yeah.
even harder because of how absurd this show is. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's like kind of the main takeaway for me from watching the rehearsal. Just
Mm.
how there are many lines that are crossed in terms of what your expectations are, even from hearing the premise itself in the execution of the show,
Yep.
without like going into too much detail of what that exactly is, right? Like I found myself constantly asking how much further Fielder can go, right? And the
Mm.
answer is almost always just a bit more. And
Yeah.
it really really brings us to some really it's strange, surprising, shocking, emotional places that I did not expect when I started watching the series itself.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a particular rehearsal that you enjoyed from the series?
I mean, obviously, the Angela rehearsal is the season-long arc of the rehearsal,
Hmm.
but the rehearsal I most enjoyed is his very bizarre acting class, the Fielder method, where
Yes,
he
exactly.
teaches. Yeah, that's the one that I kind of actually don't want to spoil because the
Yep,
premise of it is even sillier, and then it doubles down and triples down,
yep,
and it becomes a rehearsal within a rehearsal within a rehearsal
yep,
where Fielder is trying to analyze whether what he's doing is right or wrong.
yep,
And it's hard to remember where the starting point even was.
yeah.
It's this artificial vortex of impersonation where life's performative aspects are highlighted, and it's
Hmm.
incredible. Yeah. What about you?
Yeah. It was exactly the same. I think for me, it was the I think for many people, this is going to be the first point where you realize you realize the fullness of what you've gotten yourself into as an
Mm-hmm.
audience member, right? Like it is the threshold of absurdity before everything comes to a fall, right? In terms of like the overall season itself, I just love that like it's almost like a review moment, like a half review as to what exactly the direction of the rest of the season is going to be, but it doesn't really quite prepare you for that either. But just the glimpse of that made it incredibly kind of like exciting with how like you are informed about how possibly complicated that this is going to be, right? And what you possibly might need to wrap your head around.
Yeah.
And yeah, yeah. The fielder method was that moment for me.
Definitely, definitely, yeah. Obviously, the show's emotional core is Angela and Adam and everything, and Nathan's own journey of self discovery, which he goes through in Even for You as well.
Yeah.
It's something that his shows have always driven towards.
Hmm.
It starts as a selfless endeavor and becomes a selfish endeavor.
Yeah.
And I know the show's modus operandi not only involves devising bizarre scenarios, but then, like I said, doubling down and tripling down on them until it's hard to remember where you started. And
Yeah.
Fielder explores hopes and fears by deep diving into what I said, like this vortex of artificial impersonation,
Hmm.
about performativeness in your behavior, about the reactive possibilities that can be examined, and how uncertainties can be challenged, all in an effort to eliminate anxiety and pain. The
Yeah.
anxiety and pain that comes from dealing with circumstances that are out of your control.
Hmm.
That's what Fielder wants to do. At the same time, Fielder, who is playing a needy and insecure version of himself, becomes as much part of the rehearsals as the folks he is supposedly assisting. And he
Hmm.
uses these interactions to reflect on his own existential woes. And by the time the first season concludes, the rehearsal has transformed into a sprawling, multifaceted inquiry into the highly particular questions and concerns that spawned it in the first place. The show is like
Yeah.
a magic trick
Hmm.
orchestrated by an eccentric nerd who's convinced that just with just a little bit more practice, he, the socially awkward man, can perfect the myriad of interactions and unforeseen events that dominate or define our lives. There aren't many comedy shows that take such ludicrous chances and ask such heady questions that the
Yeah.
rehearsal does, nor are they lucky enough to be led by someone like Theodore, who is quite honestly a comic visionary who has once again turned a parody of reality TV into a brilliant dissection of human nature.
Mhm.
Any final thoughts on Rehearsal before we move on?
Oh man, I know that cringe comedy isn't for everyone, but like the rehearsal, by the end of it, feels pretty transcendent. I'm gonna have to say, right? Like,
Hmm.
it is, I think, the most surprising TV show I've watched this year. And give it a shot. Yeah, just give it a shot and just be prepared for a ride.
Hmm. Definitely, yeah. You can catch the Rehearsal if you're streaming it on HBO Go, or if you live in America on HBO Max. Sometimes they are rerun on main HBO as well, so you can catch them on all of that. Yeah, if you're a fan of Nathan For You, if you're a fan of How To with John Wilson,
Yeah,
please go out of your way to catch this show. Finally, the fourth and final one that we'll be talking about is a new show called Somebody Somewhere. This is very difficult to describe because not much happens in HBO's Somebody Somewhere. But
hmm,
don't let that deceive you. This comedy is a stealthy new arrival that doesn't shout out its charms, but rather lets them unfold steadily with surprising beauty. It drops us into the life of Sam, who is played by Bridget Everett, a woman in her 40s who has recently moved back to her hometown of Kansas. She returns to take care of her dying sister, but now that her sister is gone, she finds herself stuck and purposeless and lonely. Um, the best analog that I can give for Somebody Somewhere is perhaps One Mississippi, if you've seen it.
hmm,
But chances are you've never seen One Mississippi either. So it's very difficult to describe the vividness and sense of place and quietness of a show like this. Everett plays Sam as lost and weary. She has this very morbidly boring job marking exam papers, and the closest person to her is her niece, Shannon, much to the dismay of Shannon's own mother. The first episode involves some scene setting, so to fill you guys in. Sam's mother drinks too much, and her surviving sister is a pressure cooker of emotions. Life is not so bad that it's harrowing, but the monotony is wearing Sam down. So when Sam meets a friend, a new friend called Joel at work, a hint of brightness begins to return to her life. Joel, who's played by a fantastic Jeff Hiller, used to idolize Sam when they were in school together. She doesn't remember him, but they were both in what they call show choir, which I can basically assume is like Glee Club. Sam was the star of a show choir, and apparently her Peter Gabriel performance left a big mark on Joel. Joel is a pianist at church, and he takes Sam along to one of their secret cabaret nights he puts on there.
hmm.
Secret as in he doesn't tell the pastor, or if the pastor does know, he tells him it's choir practice. Inevitably, Sam starts to exercise her lungs and dives back into her old, long forgotten talents. Small towns or working class communities sometimes seem to get a rough ride on TV.
Yeah.
They are treated either as crime scenes or with kind of big city disdain, but this is a truthful and affectionate portrait. Everett, who herself grew up in a small town of Manhattan, not Manhattan, New York, but Manhattan, Kansas, herself has described the show as like an alternate version of her life had she not moved away. And there's an intimacy in that shines through. As a show about found family, rather than the one that we are given, this is gorgeous. Sam and Joel's friendship is honest and warm,
Hmm.
and could be just what Sam needs. If Somebody Somewhere sounds sentimental, um, it's because it kind of is. Sam is kind of a brittle person. She's still grieving, overwhelmed by family drama, and there are moments of cruelty and bad behavior that are painfully but sharply observed. And it does find gentle humor in the absurd everyday moments, things like that as well. And yeah, the easiest way I could describe it to you is One Mississippi, because you've already seen One Mississippi.
Yep.
But this is a very quiet show that asks big questions on the sly. Sam finds herself completely untethered. She has a job that she did not want. She has a career that she did not hope for. She sleeps on her dead sister's sofa. Her idea of a weekend is drinking wine in her pants, which sounds very lonely. Uh, Somebody Somewhere tries to answer the questions of what happens in your midlife if you're still tetherless, and it's something that can happen. it's one thing to be in your late 20s or early 30s, like in, say, The Worst Person in the World,
Mhm.
and be devilish, but it's different when you're in your 40s,
Yeah.
and Sam feels like time is running out. It could have taken the easy path. It could have told a Rex to riches story in the same way that Bridget Everett eventually, the real actress, moved out of her hometown and then became a comedian. It could have told a story about sadness to happiness, of loneliness to friendship, but it chooses a bumpier road, and it's much lovelier and authentic for it.
Mm.
And as the series progresses, just like Sam, it starts to find a very remarkable voice of its own. This first season itself is perhaps very good, but nothing special, in a way that Reservation Dogs was very good and nothing special last year.
Mhm.
But I could see its second season, now that it's found its voice, it could become something incredible, like once in a lifetime kind of show.
Wow.
And I will talk about it a little bit later when I talk about season 2 of Reservation Dogs and how it's grown from season 1. But I get the same feeling with Somebody Somewhere here. It may not make my top 20 shows of the year, but hell, it will one of these days, preferably in season 2 or season 3. Hopefully, like, if it gets renewed.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was Somebody Somewhere. Yeah. Any last thoughts about the things that you didn't see, like High School or Somebody Somewhere? Questions you want to ask before we move on to our generic top 10 of the year?
No, I'm super excited to catch High School for sure, and definitely Somebody Somewhere, given that glowing review and the promise of a even more glowing season 2. So let's dive in.
Yeah. Let's dive into our top 10 shows of the year, not the second half, but the year overall.
Yeah.
Let's begin with your number 10. What is your number 10?
Okay, so for my number 10, I picked Andor for number 10. Right.
Okay.
I may not be our channel's resident Star Wars black belt. That title definitely goes to Hardy. But I
Yep.
loved Andor just for how different it was. Right. You guys can go back and listen. We talked all about Andor on our last genre equality episode prior to this. Behold. And we dive very deep into that, but how different it was, and for the kind of the first time we got a really lived in view perspective of Star Wars and the people that inhabit it, and we go on and on about that in genre equality, so go ahead and check that out if you're curious what we think about it. But like, just really happy to have such a sumptuous, substantial feeling Star Wars show for the first time in a long time.
Definitely. Yeah.
What's your number 10?
My number 10.
Mhm.
My number 10 show is something we've actually already covered on Genre Equality.
Oh yeah.
Season 2 of Undone. In season 1 of Undone, which is by Raphael Bob-Waxberg, the creator of BoJack Horseman. This time he's not doing traditional animation, but it's rotoscoped. It's this rotoscoped odyssey of Alma, who confronts and explores her Mexican heritage by traveling back through time to communicate with her native Mexican ancestors.
Yep.
Combining the science fiction of time travel with native spirituality, alongside her own grief of losing her dad at a young age, and hopes that she could change the timeline by helping her dad survive.
Yeah.
Season 2 digs deeper into the concepts of generational trauma and cultural memory as we learn about her father's side of the family this time. Specifically, his mother's, or at least Alma's grandmother's, his father's mother's, escape from the Polish pogroms on the eve of World War II, and how her experiences during her journey to America dictated the rest of her life.
Yeah.
Alma is transported to an alternate dimension along with the ghost of her father, as both possess the bodies of themselves in the new reality, and they work to solve a mystery surrounding an enormous secret that Alma's mother has kept from them. So season 1 delves a lot into patriarchal, or not patriarchal, like trauma on the father's side, and this one delves into trauma on the mother's side. So yeah, very, very interesting show. It's some of the best animation you ever see, especially rotoscoped animation. Some of the most trippy, emotional, and poignant storylines that you can uncover. And if you've ever seen BoJack Horseman, you know how deep shit gets, I guess, and how Raphael Bob-Waxberg likes to twist that knife in your heart. And he does that quite a bit in season 2. So yeah, that was my number 10.
Nice. Okay, cool. For my number 9, there's a bunch of good anime this year. There are also a lot of animes this particular season
Mm.
that may have probably made the list, but unfortunately they're not quite done yet. So I didn't really feel
Mm.
comfortable putting that. And we've shouted out a couple of them already and talking about the ones that we're excited about. But stick around for the next genre equality that we're holding at the beginning of next year to
Yeah.
kind of like dive into that in our little anime corner. But I picked what I think has been the most memorable so far anime that has been completed. I picked Your Boy Kong Ming for my number 9. Yeah, it
Mm.
was just a really kind of like surprising, out of left field uh, um, anime that when it aired, I was just like, I'm not sure about this premise. I'm not sure about like whether or not it's going to be good. But it turns out that at the point in time when we recommended it, it was still a bit of an underground sleeper and eventually caught on
Yep.
to a lot of kind of like mainstream hype, which I'm glad for because people were discovering that, right, the opening title and the closing title are like complete bops, right? And that it
Mm.
is, despite its strange kind of
Mm-hmm.
premise, this reverse isekai, where yeah, we've talked about it before. Um, uh, it's a very heartfelt and very kind of like wholesome exploration and subverts a lot of the things that we have come to know and love and hate about the genre, uh,
Yeah.
specifically. So yeah, that's my pick for number 9. What about you, Hits?
Awesome. My number 9 is season 3 of Rami.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked a lot about Rami before,
Oh
actually, on
yeah.
a previous episode. We discussed the first 2 seasons. It's created by Egyptian American comedian Rami Youssef, and his series has been a thoughtful, artful, and complex depiction of a young Muslim man struggling to reconcile his religion and culture with more contemporary millennial anxieties in a Western world. Now, in its third season, the show continues to be a very nuanced and awkwardly hilarious portrayal of a very wayward, selfish, indulgent man trying to be more devout, but also coming to terms with his own self absorbed hypocrisies and superficial grasps of Islam. This third season takes you into uncharted territories. It takes you outside of New York. There are whole ass arcs set in Israel.
Mm-hmm.
There are whole ass episodes set in Palestine. There is a visit to what I can only describe as a Muslim Comic Con that is the funniest thing I've ever seen. If you want to check it out, just a little snippet of it, go Google Majid Jordan Rami. He performs in a band called the Halal Brothers. And he sings a song about how when you have premarital sex, Shaitan is washing you, in a very Majid Jordan type of way. It's one of the best. It's one of the best, funniest things I've ever seen. And I would, if you were to rank pound for pound funniest scenes, or like not funniest, best scene
Yeah.
of 2022,
Yeah.
that Muslim Comic Con, Muslim convention, whatever you want to call it, is right up there at number 1. That
Oh,
particular episode for me,
damn.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and that elevates already a very, very good season with a lot on its mind. Especially that now Rami is finding success in the jewelry business, and he has to deal with, shall we say, some very shady Jews in Israel who may or may not hate Palestine, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there you go. Okay, I just want to give another very, very funny scene where he's in
Yeah.
Israel,
Uh-huh.
and he matches. He's on Tinder in Israel, and he matches with someone in Palestine. So he has to find a way to cross the border, which becomes a harrowing nightmare on its own, just so he can get laid on the other side.
Oh,
Yeah, it's Rami for you, man. That
wow.
was my number 9. Yeah.
Cool. For my number 8, we go back to something we've already covered before in the earlier half of the year, which is We Own the City. You going
Mm.
again. We are going to refer you back to our June episode of Behold, where we talk about the best TV shows from the first half of the year. Please go check out We Own This City. There's some like really kind of like tense action that's going on, some amazing kind of character work as we dive into the corruption
Yep.
within
The
the
Baltimore
police.
Police Department.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. What do you
It's
have?
written and directed by David Simon.
Mhm.
So if you love The Wire, if you love everything that David Simon does, this is the David Simon joint.
Yeah.
Go for it. This is the non-fiction version of The Shield. This is the spiritual sequel to The Wire in many,
Mhm.
many, many ways, actually.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wholeheartedly recommend that as well.
Yeah. What do you have on your number 8?
My number 8 is a show that has just recently been sadly cancelled. It's a show called Lost as Spooky. It's a show that we have talked about also.
Yes, we
It
have.
is created by it's created by Julio Torres and Anna Fabrega, who both also star. Lost as Spookies is a weird and charming comedy about four friends who love horror movies and gore, so they decide to start a business of creating scares and horror scenes for paying clients.
Mhm.
Do you need to stake a fake exorcism? They got you. Looking for a sea monster to attract tourists to your beachside town? They on it. This Spanish language series blends magical realism. See, there is a curse mirror. There is a parasitic demon obsessed with the king's speech. That was the first season, by the way. I'm talking about season 2. That parasitic demon
Yep.
is no longer obsessed with king's speech because she's seen it and thinks that it doesn't deserve an Oscar. And why was she so obsessed with it?
Oh my god.
She has decided to stop being a parasite. This fucking parasitic demon has decided to stop being a parasite, has gone into the real world to find a job, and she becomes an intern at the US Embassy in this fictional Latin American country. An unpaid intern, mind you. So it blends these really weird supernatural stories with relatable real world stories of friendship and young adulthood. Anna Fabrega is especially phenomenal as Tati in the second season, who is a gentle soul who is at first caught in a fake marriage and then caught in a new career as a very, very successful author who transcribes audiobooks. So yeah, think about that sentence for a bit. Yeah, Lost as Spookies is that kind of show. That was my number 8. Yeah.
Oh, sweet. It seems for number 7, we have the same thing. For my number 7, I picked Primal.
Yes, that's my number 7 as well. You can take it.
Yeah, so we've talked about Primal Season 1. Well, I wasn't here when we talked about Primal Season 1, but we've shouted out Primal Season 1 in one of our genre equality episodes as well. The world of Primal no longer is wordless, but that doesn't detract from how good the animation has been. Again, shout out to Genny Tartakovsky and his excellent work in telling a story about a man and his dinosaur. And as they kind of like explore the world and meet other humans along the way for the very first time since the end of season 1, and just exploring a complex relationship in the most what's the best word of it? Naturalistic of ways. I think is the best way to go about explaining that. You want something more in depth? Again, please go check out our review of Primal on Genre Equality.
Yeah. Whereas season 1 was beautifully storyboarded and wordless, and for lack of a better term, visceral, season 2 delves very deeply into the themes of what it is to be primal or what it is to be savage, and what the difference is between savagery in nature and savagery in civilization. And I think because it is so endeavored to explore those themes, it breaks its own format a lot in some very interesting ways. Which is why, like, I feel like Primal Season 2 is a more ambitious show than it was in Season 1. Kudos to Gandhi for doing this. What is your number 6?
My number 6, taking it from the first half of the year, is Atlanta.
Nice. Yeah. Have you seen Season 4 already, which is even better than Season 3?
I'm let me see. I'm about 3 episodes through Season 4. But unfortunately we can't cover that within here. So I really love where it was with Season 3. And I'm super excited with where it was in Season 4. I know they're wrapping up the show and all of that, so I'm kind of excited to see how it ends. Please, nobody spoil it for me until I get there. But yeah, Atlanta, well, I guess 1.5 seasons of Atlanta occupies Season 6 for me.
Definitely,
six
I mean, number 6, Season 4 also just recently ended. It's also its 4th and final season. After this 4-year hiatus, they gave us 2 seasons in 1 year. One was a bit divisive because of its experimentation. Part of it follows Paperboy on a wild European tour. And the second half was an anthology collection of one-off stories that examine themes of, weirdly enough, whiteness, a theme that that the show hasn't really explored before. As fascinating as all that was, the show's 4th and final season, I think, is Atlanta's best season overall over its 4-season run. It crafts a number of thought-provoking, very absurdist, very laugh-out-loud episodes about the difficulty of black artists when striving for black representation in their craft. Sometimes you can be a black artist with the most noble of intentions to represent your people, and your people will always get upset by it because you're either not representing them properly, you didn't
Yeah.
cover this aspect or that aspect. Yeah, this is the fourth season is about the difficulty of representation, and I think that's very interesting. That was your number six, right? My number six is Barry, uh, season three.
Mm-hmm.
After a long COVID delay, Bill Hader's masterpiece of a showbiz satire about kind of the dark recesses of humanity, it returns in excellent form. The titular hitman turned actor that Hader plays is scarier than ever. The creator is leaning into his character's desperation after realizing that his beloved acting teacher, Mr. Kusinau, is aware that Barry is a killer and wants to bring him down. Meanwhile, Barry's girlfriend Sally is trying to go boss, running and starring in her own TV show based on her experiences with abuse. And the way that she navigates, shall we say, the streaming world, really feels like the most scathing critique of streaming that I've ever seen on a TV show. Um, she creates this really great show. At least it looks great. From what I've heard in the writing room and what she's done, it looks amazing. It's 96% on Rotten Tomatoes, as she likes to call out every once in a while. But yeah, because the algorithm didn't push it, her show gets cancelled. Apparently, the algorithm says that every first scene, you need to have a character eating a dessert, and people will continue to watch. It's bizarre things like that got her show cancelled. And her mania over it is both hysterical and tragic, just like the rest of the series, which finds time for a lot of brutality and a lot of grief and trauma, but also for sight gags and a whole lot of good no-ho hankisms this season as well, amidst all the sorrow. So yeah, that was my number six.
Sweet. Let's go on to my number five, which we just talked about. I put The Bear at number five. You can hit back a couple of minutes to go hear us talk about that.
Definitely.
I think that kind of like here at the end of the year, and The Bear having come out in June, it's such a memorable series for me. Like, it stands out there, and like I love the fact that every once in a while, when I'm talking with my friends about food and about like the restaurant industry, like The Bear automatically kind of comes up and referencing like particular scene to that. And it might be recency bias, but I don't think so, because like I've kind of watched through it like almost twice now. Really enjoyed this series, and we've just spoken about why. What's your number five?
My number five is a show that we already talked about on Genre Equality. It's called Severance.
Yeah.
It will be making a reappearance later on Isa's list, so I'll save the discussion for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, my number five was Severance. What is your number five? You already talked about your number five. What's your number four?
Okay, my number four is Pachinko, which we talked about at the beginning of the year. One of my favorite series this year, easily, just in terms of like the thematic exploration. Just about the nuance of the subject matter, just about how it's shot, the excellent performances, the amazing color grading and costumes. Like we go real in depth with that in the episode from the first half of the year. So please go check that out if you want to know more about Pachinko.
Yep, definitely. So my number four is Better Call Saul.
Yep.
Its sixth and final season just recently wrapped up. Again, much like Severance, Better Call Saul will be making a reappearance later on, high up on Isa's list. So I will save my discussion for that one. What is your number three?
My number three is Better Things, which we've talked about before and also covered at in the first half of the year as well. I believe, with the exception of your number one, we kind of have like a bunch of things that we're sharing in kind of like the middle of the pack. Top five. Yeah, so we can kind of get to that accordingly.
Later on, okay.
Yeah, later on, yeah.
Cool. Okay, so your number three was Better Things. My number three is a show called Station 11. Now, this is going to be a very controversial pick because only half of its season aired in 2022, and the other half of the season aired in 2021. And in both instances, it pops up at number three on my list on both years. If The only reason this is not at number one is because I'm only dealing with half a season, so I don't feel comfortable putting it at number one as like the best show,
Yeah.
like by only half a season, right?
Yep.
But it's so fucking good that even half of a season already outstrips other shows, in my opinion, like Better Call Saul and Severance and Barry and all of that. So what is Station 11 about? It's on HBO, or HBO Go in Singapore. It's well, okay. It's a drama about a devastating, deadly viral pandemic, and releasing a drama about a devastating, deadly viral pandemic as the world is itself slowly creeping out of one of the worst health crises we've ever faced in our generation.
Yeah.
Sounds like a fool's errand, doesn't it? Like, who wants to watch a show that hits so close to home? Yet, Station 11 is about so much more than the aftermath. It's about hope and healing, the struggle for humanity in the face of crisis, and it finds real beauty in the telling, set both as the crisis starts to hit in the beginning. We follow Jeevan Chaudhary, who's just trying to survive, and then it focuses on the aftermath. After 99% of the world is devastated, we follow Mackenzie Davis as Kristen, who is an actress in a traveling theatre troupe who just goes around the wasteland performing Shakespeare for people. This is done by the Leftovers, Patrick Somerville, and is adapted from Emily St. John Mandel's much loved bestseller, and it is one of the most beautiful miniseries I think the medium of television has ever produced. So yeah, if you like The Leftovers, if you liked The Watchmen, if you liked the best parts of Lost, which is where all these people came from, do watch Station 11 for sure, because it comes from the same team. Damon Lindelof isn't there, but these are Damon Lindelof's prodigies, for lack of a better term. His writing team from way back in the day have gone on to do their own things, and Station 11 is one of them. But you can see a lot of the Damon Lindelof teachings in there, like how he taught them how to write is all over here. So yeah, beautiful. That was number 3. Let's go on to where are we now? We're at your number 2, right?
Okay, yeah. My number 2, we finally get to talk about Severance. Give us the lowdown, please.
Severance, to be honest, the premise of Severance is it doesn't seem like it should work as well as it does. Like, it's a sci-fi thriller. It has this tightly tuned performances, and its score is evocative and low-key and thrilling. Even the concept of the show itself feels like a high-wire act. It takes place in a world where a company called Lumen Industries has allowed, or more disquietingly required, workers to sever their work and home identities. It is trippy and methodic. After all, like, what do your work and personal life have in common beyond just happening to be the same person? Why not sever them, right? As Severance unpacks just how different those interests are, and indeed just how different those people are because they have different interests, the result gets more and more chilling as it expertly reminds us what is actually lost, even in the cleanest of work-life balances. What happens when your work self and personal self are severed from your identity? How would your work self feel leaving work and coming back the next day to work as if no time has passed, because he doesn't get to remember the time outside of work? It's probably the scariest concept I've ever come across. And I've talked a lot about it on a previous episode of Genre Equality. Actually, I gave it a 10 upon 10. But me and Hadi have already talked about it. Isa hasn't talked about it. What do you think about Severance?
So a little late to the game yet again. I only caught Severance after both hits, and Hadi gave it a 10 upon 10. For the season, oh man, I think, like, with how it was difficult after watching the entire series to kind of wrap my head around what the actual premise of the show would be like if it was in real life, right? Like, the distinctions that they kind of draw between, your in-work life, your innie and outie life, is very extremely poignant, and I think parts of me resonate with them in a way that feels a little too close to home, right? Like, just needing to separate, like, work from the rest of your life in kind of general. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Totally understand why the two of you gave it a 10 upon 10, because had I been part of that review itself, I would have easily given it a 10 upon 10 as well.
Yeah. Next up, we are going up to my number 2, which is your number 3, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Better Things. We've talked about Better Things before on FX,
Mm-hmm.
and we've talked about it on a previous episode of Behold at
Mm-hmm.
length, actually.
Yeah.
And it has sadly come to an end with its final season here this year in 2022. It's a difficult show to describe.
Yeah.
In my opinion, things and its showrunner Pamela Adlon has reimagined what coming of age stories can be with Better
Mm-hmm.
Things.
Mm-hmm.
It moves effortlessly through teen angst. It moves effortlessly through middle age. It moves effortlessly through menopause. You are coming of age in different ages,
Yeah.
and the twilight years of one's life. And all of it, from the youth to the middle age to menopause to the end, and often it's exploring these themes of coming of age in different parts of your age. Sometimes it even explores them in the same episode. But the series has remained incisive and big-hearted as it explores the various stages of adolescence from the perspective of Sam Fox's 3 children, and the travails of working motherhood. The Fox family's last hurrah,
Yeah.
in my opinion, was as glorious as it was pensive, as Sam found new and gratifying way to define this latest chapter of her life. She defied the framing of loss,
Mhm.
kind of imposed by a patriarchal society, and instead chose to focus on all she stood to gain, even as her eldest daughter moves away.
Yeah.
Her youngest is no longer cleaved to her. Her mother has rekindled an old flame. As a storyteller, Pamela Adlon often eschews closure,
Mhm.
but the final 10 episodes of her dreamy FX series certainly cements her as one of TV's best authors, and
Mm.
certainly delivers, in my opinion, great closure in its series finale. What do you
Yeah.
think about Better Things?
Oh man, I mean, like this is we've talked about Better Things a fair bit on this show, right? Remember very fondly going through. I think it was the first. I think it was the 3 seasons, right? That when we first talked about it, and enjoyed
Mm-hmm.
it thoroughly. You can go check out our episode on that itself. But you're absolutely right. I think like in the 4th season, just like very masterfully bringing all of these character arcs to such a satisfying close is it was so well done, and so I got so much satisfaction on that. Like many a times when things like good shows and you feel as though like you are kind of like craving for more, or you're looking for something, within the season to kind of like round it out in a way to you that feels good. And I think that Better
Mm.
Things does the latter so well. It's one of the shows that I will often think fondly of, and you're absolutely right. I still to this day struggle to explain it to other people,
Yep.
except that I highly recommend it, and there's a high chance you will fall in love with it as well.
Definitely, yeah. It's available on Disney Plus if you live in Singapore, so very easy to watch.
Hmm.
So I've covered my number 2. We're moving on to Isa's number 1.
Yeah.
Uh, it is Better Call Saul, which was
Hmm.
my number 4. So
Hmm.
now we can talk about it. Give us your thoughts on the final, not final 2 seasons, the 2 parts of its final season
Yeah.
of Better Call Saul.
Yeah. I wanted to withhold judgment until like kind of everything was done, but my hot take is that Better Call Saul might very well be, in my opinion, at very least equal to, or if not better than, Breaking Bad. Just
Mm.
in terms of the approach. Sure, set in the same role, we've got revisiting characters and all that, but there's something extremely nuanced about the way that Better Call Saul was told, in terms of like its pacing, in terms of its exploration of its characters, in terms of the time that it took. That I feel they learned a lot from Breaking Bad and managed to make even better. Right?
Yep.
We've talked about Better Call Saul a lot. Like almost every season, it's coming up for us, either for like a behold thing or even for just us chatting with each other about that. We are
Mm.
catching up with each other and like constantly pondering where it's going to go and how it's going to end. And now that it's done, right? I am happy that I'm happy to say that I enjoyed every moment of it. Like it is
Mm.
so difficult to find a show that revels in the processes of its characters' lives. right? And makes it entirely immersive and enjoyable at the same time. You know, not dumbing it down, not cutting it away just because you know you might feel like it's particularly boring. It is the process itself that makes this interesting, right? Whether it's you know, the process of going to court, or filing your papers, or you know, working through your problems as a couple, or planning a absurd little well, not heist necessarily, but you know, planning, scheming and planning, right? All of those
Mm,
little things, like it takes its time, and it is riveting to watch, and it is difficult to do that at the same
yes.
time. And like, it has been quite a ride throughout this entire franchise, and I would gladly do it all over again.
Definitely. I 100% agree with that. Let's move on to what is next. Is it my number one?
Yes,
Yep.
it's your number one.
It's my number one. I'll be talking about Reservation Dogs season two.
Mm-hmm.
Again, also available on Disney Plus. This comedy about teens living on a Native American reservation is so singular in its perspective that its writers and actors are so skilled at crafting near flawless television. There is not a single weak point in season two of the show. And its high points, the fact that I named it number one, is actually higher than any of of the other shows that I've talked about here. In season two, we follow our friends, the crew, the Res Dogs crew, Elora, Bear, Willie Jack, and Cheese,
Mm-hmm.
as they are confronted head on with the uncertainty of adolescence. And it captures a very universal experience, even within the specificity of living in a reservation. Each episode can be wildly different from the next, tonally, structurally, stylistically, but also they are each so different, but it's also they each fit together. It all feels like immensely satisfying steps in the overall journey of these character
Mm-hmm.
arcs. You know, there are some episodes that this year, particularly because the group has fallen out, all of them are doing different things. We follow the each individual doing their own thing. We follow each individual's parents, uncles, aunties, brothers, even the cop around town,
Yeah.
each doing their own different things. Some can be magical, some can be realistic, some can feel like a road trip, some can feel like a heist movie, but they're all each in their own different ways
Mm-hmm.
perfect. Um, in my opinion, Reservation Dogs is could have ended with the finale of season two.
Yeah.
It feels like it could, but there is a season three coming up, and I'm not gonna doubt these writers and directors anymore.
Mm-hmm.
The only season of TV, in my opinion, just to give you like a little analog lah about its quality, the only season of TV, in my opinion, that is as strong as Reservation Dogs season two
Yeah.
is Fleabag season two.
Ooh.
That's the only thing that comes close to
Ooh.
Reservation Dogs season two,
Okay.
in my
Okay.
opinion.
Okay.
So yeah, it's reached Fleabag level, which is very hard to do, shall we say?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that was my number one for 2022.
I mean, awesome. We've got quite a bit of shared picks this time round.
Mm-hmm.
With but just in kind of like different orders. So yeah.
Yep,
It's been a good year. It's been a good year.
it's been a very good year, definitely.
Yes.
Yeah. We'll be back though in a couple of weeks to talk about films now. I mean, admittedly, a lot of these films that we'll be talking about in a couple of weeks are on the small screen because we stream them. But hey, whatever, right?
Yeah.
And then there's some things like RRR, which I wish I had seen on the big screen, and Top Gun Maverick, which we did see on the big screen.
Yep.
But a lot of them are are smaller art house dramas and things like that we caught on VOD
Mhm.
or on streaming services. So we'll keep you updated about that. But I feel like we had a good crop of films this year as well.
Yeah.
Very, very strong.
Yeah, definitely.
And yeah, if you want to check out any of these shows that we just talked about, please, go back to its section, whether it's Netflix or Disney Plus or FX or Hulu
Mhm.
or HBO or whatever. Check any of these out. In fact, I think like most of our top tens,
Yeah.
each of them could be number one any other year. It's been a very, very, very strong year in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure.
I was looking at ISA's top 10. The fact that I couldn't find a spot for Atlanta. It's
Mm.
crazy to me
Yeah.
because Atlanta is so good.
Yeah.
I couldn't find a spot for Pachinko,
Yeah.
which is also very good and one of my favorite shows.
Yeah.
That just speaks to not that they're bad shows, but that they are so good but still can't make my top 10. It's ridiculous. It's been
Yeah.
a really, really, really good year. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, we've been happy to talk to you about the best TV shows of 2022.
Mhm.
We'll talk to you about the best films of 2022 coming up next. Till then, though, this has been Hitzer.
I'm Isa.
Goodbye, guys.
No.